Hello and welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman. Joining me right now on the phone from Washington, D.C. is former UN Ambassador John Bolton. Sir, it's great to speak with you again.
Well, nice to speak with you. Thanks for having me on.
It's our pleasure. Let's start with a late-breaking report coming from the Associated Press Tuesday morning. A member of the Russian Cabinet's Foreign Affairs Committee said that NSA leaker Edward Snowden has apparently accepted an offer of asylum from Venezuela. There are some doubts as to whether this report is actually true or not. But if Snowden does wind up in Venezuela, as some are predicting, how do you see a weak president like Nicolas Maduro using this ordeal to taunt the United States?
Well, I think certainly it is intended to show Venezuela's continued defiance of the United States, even though Hugo Chavez has departed the scene. I think it's a mistake on Maduro's part because whatever possibility there might have been, even for the Obama administration, to try to chart a new course with a different administration there, I think that this now makes it impossible. So Snowden, who is a man without a country as far as I'm concerned, can spend the rest of his days in Venezuela, but he better not hope that Maduro at some point is not replaced by a democratic government that might not be amenable to shipping him back to the United States.
That's a fluid situation, to say the least. We heard President Obama say previously that he's not going to scramble any jets or anything like that. Can the United States, or even should the U.S., do anything in response if, in fact, Snowden does wind up in Venezuela or anywhere else for that matter?
Well, I think whatever country takes him should feel some pain from the United States. I think the Obama administration has badly mishandled this. If the intelligence community is right that Snowden has an enormous quantity of very sensitive information with him, either on laptops or in documents or inside his own head, it's very important to get him back to the United States so that he can't spill any more of it to our adversaries or out on the public record generally, where everybody can look at it. And I think we should have made that clear to China. We should have made it clear to Russia. The president's remark about, some 29-year-old hacker that he's not going to scramble the jets for says to other countries exactly the wrong thing. It gives them the impression that really the president doesn't care that much. So either the president's not aware of what his own intelligence officials are saying, or he doesn't understand that his remarks seriously undercut any diplomatic effort to get Snowden back.
And it doesn't appear like Venezuela seems to be taking the president seriously in the least bit. Let's shift from Snowden for a second and to move to the announcement that came from the White House through the New York Times today. President Obama threatening to pull U.S. forces out of Afghanistan early. The relationship between Obama and Afghan President Hamid Karzai, according to these reports, has completely broken down. But does this announcement, this report, really change anything about the situation in Afghanistan?
Well, unfortunately, I think it may advance in time the point where Taliban and Al-Qaeda resume control of the country, and all of our sacrifice, the brave men and women who died over the past 10 years, that sacrifice will have been wasted by a mistake by our president. I think it was wrong to talk about withdrawing essentially all NATO combat forces next year. Anyway, I think this mistake compounds that. I understand why the president and Hamid Karzai may not be the best of friends. I'm not Hamid Karzai's biggest advocate myself. But, personal pique is not a reason to conduct foreign policy. And the fact is, we're not in Afghanistan for the benefit of Hamid Karzai or the Afghan people, for that matter. We're there in order to defend America at a distance from the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. And, the president seems to have this idea in his head, as he said in a speech at the National Defense University a few weeks ago, that it's time for the Afghan war to end. I don't think the Taliban got the memo. I don't think Al-Qaeda understands that now that we're not going to fight the war anymore, at least under President Obama, that they're supposed to do what? Go home and return to basket weaving? One side like us, who was the victim, who was attacked, can't decide the war is over unless we're admitting defeat. And I just think this whole policy the administration has pursued these last couple of years in Afghanistan has been a tragic mistake, and sadly, I very much fear one that we and our friends around the world will pay for later.
And keeping in mind what you just said about the Taliban, this breakdown between Obama and Karzai is reportedly over these talks that the U.S. wanted to have with the Taliban in Qatar. A lot of Americans were somewhat shocked when they heard the U.S. was planning to hold peace talks with members of the Taliban. But from your perspective, whether it's the Taliban or Karzai, is there anyone we're sitting down with in Afghanistan that's going to work with the American people to prevent that country from becoming an even more of a petri dish for these Islamic terrorists?
No, absolutely not. The Taliban only want to negotiate the terms of our surrender and withdrawal. And I understand why Karzai doesn't want us negotiating with them. The fine irony here, though, is, of course, Karzai himself tried to negotiate with the Taliban earlier. And that's one reason the Obama administration thought it might have cover to do its own negotiation. In fact, it violates a decades-long American policy through Republican and Democratic administrations. We don't negotiate with terrorists. So this whole effort and the miscommunication between Karzai and Obama, I think, is attributable largely, not entirely, but largely to Obama's own complete misunderstanding of how you handle threats like Islamic terrorism against the United States.
And as you said, perhaps compounding the issue of the wasted amount of blood and treasure the U.S. has poured into Afghanistan. Let's also discuss Egypt, another foreign policy crisis that the White House is dealing with. Tuesday, the Muslim Brotherhood rejected this plan from the interim government, the new president's plan for a transition from the Morsi government to new leadership. This comes after more than 50 people were killed in clashes between the military and Morsi supporters on Monday. Both sides blaming the other for throwing the first punch in all of this. But my question is this: how many more days of violence like Egypt saw on Monday can the nation handle before this explodes into a full-on civil war similar to what's going on in Syria?
Well, I think they're very close to it. The difference is that the army in Egypt is so much more powerful than Assad's forces in Syria, and at least as of now, the Muslim Brotherhood doesn't have the kind of clout that the opposition has. That said, you're exactly right to ask about the prospects of massive nationwide violence and a lot more blood being shed. I think the army did the only thing it could do. The Muslim Brotherhood was engaged in a creeping coup after their election. They were looking to make it as the saying goes, one person, one vote, one time. And, with millions of people on the street demonstrating against the Muslim Brotherhood and with the Brotherhood on the street demonstrating in favor of Morsi, it was only a matter of time before the civilians started mayhem against each other. It's obviously tragic that we've had this attack, but I must say, from the evidence we have, it looks to me like the Muslim Brotherhood provoked it, that they wanted the army to react the way it did. The Brotherhood was looking to create martyrs for its cause. That's not the way we think in the West, but that's the way Islamic fanatics think. And, for well or ill, there are plenty of people in the military who'd be just as happy to help them reach that objective of martyrhood. We've got to find a way to keep this calm. I think showing a signal of support for the military will increase, certainly keep our leverage where it is now. And I think the military, sad to say, is the only institution in Egypt that's capable of restoring peace and getting stability into the equation, which has important ramifications not just in Egypt domestically, but for us internationally, keeping the Camp David peace accords with Israel in effect and keeping the absolutely vital Suez Canal open.
Yeah, you mentioned that Egypt, of course, is one of our most important allies in the region, along with Israel. But what kind of role are countries like Qatar and Turkey playing in Egypt now? Are they throwing their support behind the Muslim Brotherhood, the military? How is the outside forces affecting the situation in Egypt?
Well, according to reporting from the region, it looks like those governments are trying to support the military. Egypt's economy is in desperate shape. That's one reason the demonstrators were in the street against Mohamed Morsi. He took a bad economy a year ago and made it much worse. And so I think many Egyptians say, look, if he had been in the business of fixing the economy, we might ultimately support an Islamist state, but we want the economy fixed first. And Morsi's single-minded pursuit of radical Islamic political theory alienated a lot of the Egyptian people. But if something isn't done to turn the economy around, which really is on the verge of being a basket case, then you're going to have serious, potentially serious humanitarian problems, shortages of food and the like, and enormous political instability because of people not having jobs, not having incomes, and everything that brings in any society.
And of course, that leads me to my next question. That's the issue of the U.S. aid that is poured into Egypt as well. A big point of debate right now is whether or not to call this a coup. The White House has stopped short of using that word. There's a U.S. law that prevents the United States from providing military or financial aid to a country whose leadership came to power through a military coup. But what's your take? Is this a coup? Is this a military takeover? Does it matter? Are we arguing about semantics here?
Yeah, I think we need to cut through the semantics. Of course it's a coup. Look at the reality on the ground. The army overthrew Mohammed Morsi. Case closed. There is a law, as you mentioned, that prohibits American assistance in such circumstances. The president typically is trying to reinterpret the law to mean something that it doesn't say. I think the more honest, more direct approach is for the president to say, I need a congressional fix to this. I need it immediately. We shouldn't let a technicality stand in the way of protecting American interest. We need to get this done. And then I would make sure that the assistance, which is primarily military assistance to the Army, keeps flowing.
Yeah, just a clear example on how better communication between Congress and the White House would do everyone a lot of good, at least it appears so in this case. Former UN Ambassador John Bolton, as always, a pleasure speaking with you, and thanks for your time, sir.
Well, thanks again for having me.
Our pleasure. Thanks for watching Newsmax TV.